Hey boss, welcome to a Thursday Collection Connection, where we're playing that game that's just an excuse to talk about records. Today we're going to be forging a connection between Cracker's debut album, Cracker, from 1992, and Scritti Politti's Cupid and Psyche 85 from, 1985. Yeah, okay. So that's coming up. First, let me tell you how we play the game. Every Thursday, I show a record. Every Monday, Eric shows a record. Eric being my brother Eric, and he's on the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel. We just got past our 300th episode, and ever since album number 1, every album that we've talked about has had to relate in some way to the album from the previous video. Now, I thought it'd be fun to slice and dice some numbers from our first 300 episodes really quick, even though it's 300 episodes under the Collection Connection banner. The first 7 episodes were compendium episodes that had, in the first 2 episodes, we did 6 albums apiece, and in the last 5 of those episodes, we did 5 albums apiece so that we could switch off who went first. And those were compilations from Zoom calls that we did back and forth during the watershed year of 2020. With episode 8, we went to the more current format of just 1 album per episode that we're talking about, and maybe a little bit talking about the album that we're connecting to. And at some point last year, we changed the format a little bit to, rather than just telling you what the connection is, we challenge you to try to guess what the connection is between the 2 albums. So that was a long way of saying that even though we've done 300 episodes, there have been 330 albums covered so far. So that's actually 175 albums each. To break those down, I thought we could slice and dice. We have done at least 1 album from every year between 1965 and 2023. Neither of us have picked one from the young year of 2024 so far. I think I only have 1 album that has come out this year so far, but that is a 59-year span. And to break that down by decade, from the 1960s, we've done 18 albums. From the 1970s, 42 albums. From the 1980s, kind of our sweet spot, you'd think, 89 albums. 1990s, 77 albums. The 2000s, we talked about 44 different albums. The 2010s, 41 albums. And from the 2020s, already 19 albums. So 2020s, even though we're in the early stages of the decade, we have still done more 2020s albums than 1960s albums. The most popular year that we've done, we've got a 3-way tie. We've done 15 albums apiece from the years 1986, 1990, and 1994. So that accounts for 45 of those 330 albums from just those 3 years. To break it down by country, we are not quite one-trick ponies, but we're very much two-trick ponies. And between the US and England, we've done 143 albums from artists that we would classify as American artists, and 114 from those we would classify as English artists. Now, I have broken it up to sort of disambiguate the UK, just because I like Scottish artists, labeling them as Scottish artists as opposed to UK artists. And Scotland is actually our 4th most frequent country with 13. We've done 15 Australian artists and 7 from Canada, but a total of 18 different countries that we've talked about albums from. And if you combine, I believe, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, which there's been just 1, I think, which was the Undertones, and Wales, which there's been 2, both Moon Goose albums. There have been a total of 134 UK albums, so still a little bit under the 143 of the US, but a much closer game there. But by and large, the albums that we talk about come from one of those 2 countries. Let me see, I got a couple other notes here. We presented 2 albums by a total of 24 different artists, and 3 albums by just a handful of artists. Biffy Clyro, Eric played all of those. Led Zeppelin, Eric played all of those. Tool, Eric played all of those. And New Order, that was 2 Eric, 1 from me. Peter Gabriel, 2 from Eric, 1 from me. REM, 2 from Eric, 1 from me. And then They Might Be Giants and XTC, which I played all 3 of those records. I think that's all the ones that we've done 3 from, and then tied for the most played are the Beatles, and Eric played all of those, and the OCs in their different name guises. 3 different names the albums have been released under, but they are all kind of under the OCs umbrella, and all of those were played by Eric as well. So yeah, a little breakdown by year, by country, and our most frequently played bands there through 330 albums discussed on the Collection Connection so far. But with that out of the way, let's get the regular episode going. First up, we need to clear up the previous connection, which nobody guessed again, although I guessed it, and it wasn't put in the database where I could see it, and I figured it out before Eric told me what it was. And it was that between They Might Be Giants and Cracker, they both had the same booking agent, whose name I'm going to forget, maybe Frank Riley, something like that. I'm pulling that out. That could be it, or that could be a mile away from it. But like Triad Booking, something, same booking agent, booking their tours. And that was the connection. Nobody guessed it. And so we get to move on into the regular episode. So here we go. All right, so Eric talked about Cracker's eponymous debut album, Cracker, which I also had. Here it is. I was a natural Cracker fan. I came over from Camper Van Beethoven, so David Lowery's previous band, which was much more, to me, sonically distinct. They had, to me, a very unique blend of sort of Eastern European folk and surf and punk, indie, just this brew that I don't know that any other band has ever really done in the same way. And Cracker was a little more of a straight-ahead artist. Eric classifies them as country. We've had this conversation before amongst ourselves. I don't really think of them as country. I think of them as more Americana. And David Lowery's sort of surfer drawl lyrics and singing voice prevents me from ever really seeing it as country. But maybe a certain kind of band like maybe Jason Isbell currently that operates under the country flag, but maybe is something that I would listen to, but I don't consider Cracker country necessarily. My big exception, because I'm not a country listener either, to country would be Lyle Lovett, someone who I do think kind of works, but he's eccentric enough that I like what he does. So, but Cracker, I think it was good to listen to this record again. I do love Teen Angst, you know, What the World Needs Now, and there's some great songs on here. Happy Birthday to Me is a good follow-up at track 2. Teen Angst opens the album. And there's other fun stuff, both the kind of upbeat and more slow ballady kind of things, but they're definitely in a more straight vein. I still wouldn't call it, you know, it's like more like roots music to me than it is country music. Make your own distinctions, I guess, there. But I like Cracker. It's a good album. But I kind of stopped listening to it. And generally speaking, when I'm up or down for a bit of Cracker, their second album, Kerosene Hat, is what I'll put on. I think it's my favorite. I really love Low, I think, is a high point. Euro Trash Girl, I think, is the best song that they ever did. And yeah, I really enjoy Kerosene Hat. And so it's one of those second albums that sort of eclipses the first album to me. And I go back to the first album less often, even though there's nothing wrong with the first album. It's good stuff. I enjoyed it. It was great to have an excuse to pull it out and listen to it again. And so for a connection, I connected it to 1985's Cupid and Psyche 85 from Scritti Politti. This was an interesting one to pull out again. Perfect Way was a hit in the US, kind of their only hit, not their only thing to chart, but their only thing to chart anywhere near the top of the charts. And it went to, I think, number 11, and they had a couple, I think that's the only time they ever really broke even the top 40. They had maybe 2 other singles throughout their career that charted at all in the US. So they weren't big in the US, but it's surprising to me that Perfect Way was not the big single in England. It was the third biggest of 4 singles that they did there. a couple of singles that came out before the album came out, and that would be Would Be's Pray Like Aretha Franklin, which is the sort of a subtitle, but it's not listed here. On the album as a subtitle. I think once it was a single, or as a single it did. And Absolute. So the two big ones I think were Would Be's, and then kind of more in anticipation of the album was The Word Girl. It's a funny album for me to pull out and listen to now, as much as I love Perfect Way, and I think it's an enduring song. It's funny when people talk about 80s music aging badly, especially when we've had decades in between and time to come around where the 80s aesthetic is hot again, and there's albums from the last 10 years that sound very much inspired by the music of the 80s. Kind of gives it a second life, and yet there's something about the Scritti Politti that feels more stuck in its time to me than even stuff that is super early, like earliest Depeche Mode, like synth pop and stuff like that. That is of its age, but to me it hasn't necessarily aged, because it did what it meant to do and still holds up and sort of represents its era, but doesn't necessarily sound to my ear like bad. There's a lot of searching for a synonym that I didn't come up with. And so it's strange that there is this sort of jazz and funk inspired Scritti Politti. This was their second album. Their first was founded by Green Gartside and a couple of his classmates in art school in Leeds. Even though he himself is Welsh, he doesn't sound Welsh. I'm not sure where to come from with these guys, because it was very politically motivated, like the name itself might tip you off. Scritti Politti, being a slight bastardization of Scritti Politti, which is political writings, a book that inspired Green Gartside to give the band its name, but he changed one letter so that it rhymed and sounded a little more like Tutti Frutti. So it was kind of high-minded and low-minded rock and roll blended into one single band name, Scritti Politti. But he abandoned sort of the Marxist views of their early recordings almost immediately and sort of disbanded the band. So Scritti Politti is one of those bands where Green Gartside is Scritti Politti, and yet they've always been a band. It was never just him under the guise of a band. And so I'm not sure where even to say that they're from at this point, since he was born in Wales. They formed in London. Everybody but him went away. He went to New York, sort of formed a new band, new collaborators who were American, who were going to sort of legitimize sort of the funk and R&B elements that he wanted to infuse his music with, and embrace a certain amount of commerciality, having gone kind of 180 from more of a punk beginning to just trying to write some smooth, funky, R&B inspired pop songs. And they're almost so smooth in the 80s that listening to them, the thought that passed through my head was like they're sort of like a Jamiroquai for the 80s. And you can decide for yourselves, I guess, whether that's a compliment or an insult. But it kind of depends on my mood when I put it on. Do I enjoy it? Do I not enjoy it? I put The Word Girl on a mix, and I'm aware that I'm the only one who enjoys it in my family. Everybody else in the car would skip it when they're in the car, so I only hear it when I'm by myself when I'm playing this particular playlist. But I like Small Talk. I love Perfect Way. Flesh and Blood is interesting in that it is the sort of the backing track of The Word Girl done with a female rap artist sort of writing her own lyrics and doing a rap over the top of it. So that's something different kind of for the time. But yeah, I really go back and forth on what I think about the album, which I guess I bring up primarily because it sort of annoyed me when I listened to it in the last couple of days. It became the sort of thing that I'm self-conscious about defending, which I guess makes me want to defend it less and makes me want to just capitulate and say, yes, you're right, it sucks. It doesn't suck. It's got some good songs on it. It's just got a sound to it that, in a weird way to me, dates badly. and it ended up being the only Scritti Politti I ever bought. I do have their song, the earlier song called "The Sweetest Girl," from a compilation, a Cherry Red compilation, and I know that song better from the Madness cover of it. I don't know if Eric is aware that the Madness Sweetest Girl is a Scritti Politti song. Green Gartside wrote it. But yeah, they've kind of been on and off. They did not release a lot of albums when they were fully active. It was kind of 3 years between albums. And then Green Gartside would kind of put it away for 7, 8, 9 years after Provisions in 1989, I think. And he came back, did a couple more records, still maybe performs here and there, but for the most part, they're a done deal. But yeah, that's Scritti Politti. Probably said more about them than you ever care to know, but it is an interesting record, and it does have Perfect Way, which is a fantastic single. One of my favorite singles. It surprises me it was not a bigger hit in the US. And so we challenge you to identify the connection between Cracker, this album, and Scritti Politti's Cupid and Psyche 85, which I will say that we used to always call Cupid and Psych. I think psych was just a big word in our vocabularies in the 80s, like psych, and it wasn't until later that that's Psyche. And so we were kids, young teenagers when it came out. And yeah, Cupid and Psyche is like some Greek or Roman tale. I don't know how it relates necessarily to this, but it is a famous myth of Cupid and Psyche. I'm continuing to blather. I'm not sure why. So if you have a guess as to the connection between Cupid and Psyche 85 and Cracker, put it down in the comments. First right answer will get a shout out in Eric's video on Monday. But I feel pretty solid that nobody's going to guess this one. There's a little bit of in-between information that you would need to know and would probably require a little research. I would say it's easier to spot from Eric's album than from my album. Maybe look at the musicians and think on it for a little bit. But there is a little bridge, something that you can say about both albums that requires knowledge of a third band. I'll say that. So with that, that's all I got. You can look forward to Eric's connection to Scritti Politti on Monday. And with that, that's all I got. So I thank you for watching. Bye-bye.